Oops. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empowered to Live, the place where faith meets purpose and purpose fuels freedom. I am your host, Andrea Rose Butler, Becoming Women's Network. So glad to have you all here with me on this evening as we continue on our journey to becoming. And over the past few weeks, we've discussed that living in purpose is not a destination, it is a journey that we're on, and we never really quite like fully reach it, because even though when we reach it, we're talking about today about growing and staying grounded. But as we reach our destination or reach we're continuing on our journey, because it is not a destination. We're going to continue to develop ourselves and continue to learn and continue to grow. And so we'll continue to do that. And then last week we talked about that God requires our obedience over perfection. So he is not looking for us to be perfect. He just wants us to be obedient, to walk into the things that he has called us to and created us for. And it doesn't need to be perfect. I've shared this over and over again, that God just wants us to take those faithful steps and walk into what he has called, created us to do, to be. And it doesn't have to look pretty. For those of you all who have been, you know, rolling with me for the past 2 years, know that this podcast is not always the best, the prettiest. We have grown since our inception, where we were on this Facebook Live and all the other stuff. And now we're streaming on different platforms, and, still building out our Spotify, and then we do iHeartRadio. But we'll continue to grow, and continue to evolve. And so that's what we're talking about today. How do we stay grounded while we're growing? Growth is beautiful. Like I said, this has been a journey. When I started out, didn't have a logo, got a logo now. Different things that have happened, didn't have guests, having guests on the show. So all of these things that have happened, they're all part of growth, and the growth has been beautiful. Whereas before I was flying by the seat of my pants, now we're planning out, you know, weeks and months ahead, and staying ahead and doing different things, instead of just like, what am I going to talk about today? It was just kind of that hit and miss, but I was growing, and I stayed faithful to what I know that God had called me to do. And so, but if we grow without grounding ourselves, it can leave us exhausted, because again, we end up in that place where we are performing and not actually living out what we need to be living out. And so we're talking about, like, what does it mean to stay spiritually grounded while we continue to grow, to serve, and to walk in our purpose? Because growth shouldn't steal your peace. It shouldn't. You shouldn't be stressing out. So when God gives you something, there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be attempts on your peace, but your peace won't be stolen. And there's a difference, and you will know the difference. And for you that's been walking a while, maybe you just started on your journey, that when trials come, when difficulties come, and as you all have seen me on this journey with my health for the past almost 2 years now, and praise the Lord, I have surgery scheduled, so yay. With that, so we in July, so you're going to be see some pre-recorded shows. My July, basically the whole month of July is going to be pre-recorded, and maybe August too. We'll see how that goes, because I'm not sure how long I'll be able to sit up to do the shows live. So we'll probably pre-record before, I go under the knife, so that, but I will still want to stay faithful and stay grounded, even while we're growing and even while I'm facing my own difficult situations. But I have God's peace in the midst of that. So even while we're growing. And so our anchor scripture for today is Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. It says, "So then, just as you have received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, being rooted and built up in him." So we are rooted in him, we're built up in him. It's not about us, it's not our strength, it's not, our own might, but it is because we are connected John talks about that in John 15, where he talks about us staying connected to the true vine. And we can bear fruit from that as long as we're connected. When we disconnect, when we're cut off and we're separated, then we don't continue to grow. And so we wanted to be connected to that. And as I was thinking about this, even as I was preparing for this evening, I thought about a plant. And sometimes seeds can fall on the ground, and if the ground is a little stirred up, and is got the water, a seed will germinate, and it will start to try and bear roots, but those roots don't go deep. And so it was kind of spring up and then it would kind of fall over because it hasn't been grounded. It hasn't been, yeah, it hasn't got a foundation for that. And then the other thought came to me was also Jesus was talking the parables about the house being built on the sand when troubles come, because the foundation isn't built on the rock, then that house is washed out. And the same for us. We've got to stay connected to the vine, which is Jesus. We make sure we build on the firm foundation, which is his word. And we got to make sure that our roots go deep so that when adversity comes, when trials comes, when testing comes, and I've shared this, multiple times on this podcast, that there are going to be times that our faith is going to be tested. There's no getting around it. We can't pray our way out of trouble. Life happens. And sometimes life happens and it catches you by surprise. But how rooted and grounded are you so that you can stay and so that you can grow and continue to live, in the way where you are settled and that you are grounded. And that's the important part, is to be grounded on that, so that, again, if you're growing and you've seen people, get big too fast, going back to that tree without the roots, that no, if you're not grounded and you take off and you get really big, sometimes we forget God and we forget where we came from. We forget that foundation of our faith, and we look for the applause and we miss out on what our actual purpose is. And we know we've seen organizations, churches, ministry leaders who started out, you know, I think it was Paul who asked the question I think it was to the church of Ephesians. He said that don't quote me on that. He said, you ran well, but who hindered you? And sometimes we can start running and we run well, but if we're not grounded spiritually, you know, we can become hindered. We can lose our purpose for why we started the journey in the first place. We can become discouraged. I saw that a lot even when I worked in social services, when we forget your why. Why did you get into this? Was it because it was a good job? We had a government job and we felt it was secure. And, we thought it was going to be easy. And we got in there and it wasn't. And the clients weren't nice, and a lot of things happen, and we forget. Sometimes we become bitter because we forgot the purpose and the reason behind the why we started. And so it's important for us to remember that, to stay grounded, because again, when we're not grounded and rooted, it becomes performance. We just show up and we act the part, but we're not actually living. And so we're talking about, how do we move from becoming to living out the purpose that for which we were called. And so people, and then you burn out, which is where a lot of people ended up, where they became bitter, they burned out, because their purpose wasn't rooted, it wasn't grounded, and they didn't have that. And so growth requires rest, and that's so important for us to rest, take care of ourselves. Reflection. Sometimes we have to go back and say, okay, why did I started this journey to begin? What's the reason why? You can go back and look at some of those earlier podcasts where we talked about your why. What is your why? Because your why will keep you when life gets hard, when times get hard, when things don't work out the way you thought they should. But when you know your why and you can go back and reflect. I talked about before, having your mission statement or purpose statement, writing one for your own life, and if whatever it is, your ministry, and for yourself, to have your purpose statement as to why am I doing what I'm doing, and then go back and revisit. that. And if it's not lining up, if you see your life not going the way, the purpose that you originally started out, go back and revisit it and take a look at it. And I often reflect back on that scripture that started to become a woman's network, because for this journey of what I knew I was going to go through, that it was for other people. And so whenever I face these difficulties, I remind myself, okay, God, I know it's happening to me, but I know it's not for me. And so help me to walk out this race that you called me to. Keep those spiritual rhythms. So we're going to rest, reflect. And, what are the things that you were doing in the past? Spending time in prayer, spending time in Bible study, going to church, reading your Bible, spending your quiet time, worshiping, all those things that you normally used to do when we got busy, because now, things have taken off and we no longer have time for God. Set boundaries. Ooh, that's a big one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, in a few. But boundaries are important. Are you protecting the margins of your life, or is stuff that's flowing all over the place, and there's no boundaries, there's no protection for you and for your life? And then being rooted matters. So again, being connected to the vine, being connected to your purpose, and making sure that all of those things line up and that they're all falling into place, and you're not missing out on what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So what are some of the things that keep us from being grounded? Staying busy. Staying busy. And again, going back to those boundaries, and is your life overflowing the edge of your life? I think I shared before, there's this book talking about the margins, and are you living within the margins, or are you like all the way out? And you out there so far, that your life is falling off the edge, because there's we can be busy, because sometimes too we stay busy because we want to mask our insecurities, we mask our fears, it masks the fact that we feel like we haven't achieved it yet. So and so we feel like we haven't, everyone else is doing better than us, and so we add more stuff to our plate, and we act busy, and then we're tired. Overcommitting without boundaries. I talked about that a couple of months ago, about saying yes to everything. Everything is not for you to say yes to. And that's important for us to remember, that everything is not for you to say yes to. And no is a complete sentence. And that is something that I have had to learn to say no, and to even to, when I feel myself getting back to that space where I want to say yes, I was like, can I get back to you? And allows me to put some walls in place, that will help me to make sure that I'm not stepping outside of my walls. And so for me, who loves to say yes to stuff, 'cause especially when it comes to church, it would ask you, and we're like, yes, I'll do it, knowing that you don't have time, that you already got 11 things on your plate, but you say yes anyway. And so we overcommit. We neglect spiritual habits. And then, all these things start, we don't have enough time to fit all the things in. And, and you're like, and you feel like you're happy, but you're not, you're tired. And I'm thinking to myself, because I've been there. I've been to that space where I was like so overcommitted that I was exhausted, but I was just like, I can't say no, and I got to keep running, got to keep running. And it was like, and somebody reminded me that even Jesus, when the crowds were coming, he was moved with compassion, but he was like, I need a break. And he went up, he left the disciples, he left everybody, and he stepped off, he went away by himself, you know. And he was just like, y'all going ahead without me, because I need some time. I need some me time. And he did that. And if he did that, it says that we need that as well. So we've got to set ourselves up and not overcommit and neglect our spiritual habits of spending some quiet time, spending those moments, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's late at night, whether, sometimes, what I would do was like when I would, try to listen to worship music on my way to work, on my way home from work, because I needed to prepare myself to go to work. Then I had to prepare myself to come home from work. And sometimes I would just sit in my car and just sit there and let the music play. Sometimes I would just like, I just need to pray. And other times I just need to sit in the quiet and just like, okay, I need, before I face the rest of my day, I need this moment, taking time for, 5 or 10 minutes from your lunch break to sit and just kind of reflect and get back into those habits. Feeling pressure to produce, again, it's that busyness that we feel we've got to, we live in a society that says production is the thing. You got to produce. What are you doing? You know, how much money you making? Do you have that house yet? Do you have the car? Do you have the right clothes? Do you have this? Is your hair done? Is your nails done? Da, da, da. And it's all of it's production. And it's all a part of that going back to performance because we have not been grounded. And it's important that, we don't just become producers. We are human beings, not human doers. And so when we look at it, have to focus in on saying, okay, is what I'm doing what God requires of me, or am I doing this because somebody says, I think you'll be good at it? And because we have those spaces where we need that validation, we take stuff on. And I say no. I say no. I'm saying no for you. And every time I hear my friend, from years ago, she said to me one time, I think we were at church, and she goes to me, she goes, say no. And I was like, what? And she's like, say no. And I was like, no. She goes, did the world stop? And did anyone die? And I was like, no, but she's like, not no, but just no. No, no one died. The world did not stop because you said no. She goes, I need you to practice that. Say no. And it still took me years to get to that place to recognize that no is a full sentence. And so I don't need to produce. I was sharing with my chat. I use chat to help me stay organized, and I run stuff by whatever. And as I was thinking about, planning and trying to figure this whole surgery stuff and all these other things, and I had so much stuff I was still in school, and all these things were happening. And I remember saying to her, I said, Wonder Woman is on vacation. And I was, and I don't even know where it came from. But it just popped into my head that Wonder Woman needs a vacation. She's got to stop. She's got to retire her cape, take off her little bracelets, and take her headband off and sit. And there was just so much, that was happening. And I was like, you know what? Wonder Woman has to go on vacation. And I think for a lot of us, we have that Wonder Woman syndrome. We're told to be the Proverbs 31 woman, and she's got all this stuff. She considers a field and she buys it, and she's sewing clothes, and she's doing this, and she's doing all this other stuff. And she's raising her kids, and we're told that this is how we're supposed to be. And so therefore we don't build rest in until we are burnt out, we are exhausted. Our health starts to fail because we haven't taken care of ourselves. And there's a necessity and a need for us to be able to do that. Whether you're male or female, there is a need for rest and for us to take it. And so we need to prioritize our time with God first and foremost. Protect our peace, protect our boundaries, protect our life. Rest with intention. And for those of y'all that know me, I have what I call my Sunday naps. I don't care what's going on. It's like whether I'm in church in person or church on Zoom, when service is over, I'm going to take a nap. And sometimes I don't sleep, but I just take that time to rest, to just lay down I try not to scroll on my phone, and I just lay in the quiet and quiet my mind and quiet myself. And even when my girls were younger, they learned. We came home from church, we had lunch, and put your comfy clothes on, and we're going to rest. I don't care if you lay there and read a book. I there was no TV and whatever. It's you're gonna read a book. You can play with your toys or whatever. But you're gonna sit in the quiet. If you want to take a nap, you can take a nap. Whatever it is. And so they learn even now. They do their Sunday naps as well because it became a habit. And so you can train your family to get into that space of we're going to take this moment. Sunday is supposed to be our day of rest, but we fill it with so much stuff that it looks just like every other day. And so that's what you need to make that Sabbath. It doesn't necessarily have to be on Sunday. That's when I do it. When I take my Sunday naps, and it's my intentional time of resting. I try not to work on anything. I'm like, God, I in Sunday school, we do we do morning worship, and then it's nap, and then it's nap. And then later on, if I'm in the middle of writing and inspiration strikes, I may get up and I was like, okay, you're going to write for 30 minutes, and then you're cutting it off, and then you're done. You're not working on anything. We're not planning anything. We're not going to look at, what the next podcast is, what series, nothing. Rest, intentional, and it's about intentional rest, intentional, and then build rhythms, build sustainable rhythms, where you have your routines, where I've been sharing about, me exercising and doing things, and I use this app that every morning she goes on an adventure, and that adventure, she gets energy basically by me doing the things that I need to do, whether it's, doing my performing, it's just 3 minutes, but I usually do like 15. It's about much as like my leg can stand. Um, you know, doing stretches in the morning, all these different things to help me stay in motion and to have that rhythm. Do my workout, get ready. So, you know, Bible time, exercise, so spiritual, physical, then eat, coming here, and I'm on my laptop. I'm working on different stuff, trying to finish books, planning out stuff, working on things with the foundation, doing all of these things that I know I need to do, getting myself prepared. So everything has a rhythm, it's a system. When I would go to work, it was the same thing. We get up, a required time, you shower, get dressed, head to work, eat breakfast when I got to work, make sure I had that time, was prepared. All I had to do was just open up and sit there, eat and work. Go to lunch, have my quiet time. Sometimes if I had a meeting or, during my lunchtime, do what I needed to do. But a quiet time, sometimes I would do a little mini workout in my office during lunch, and all those different things to make sure that I kept a rhythm. And that's why it's best for us to be consistent in building that. So consistency is key to making sure that we stay on track. And so as we wrap up, so journal time for my writers. Okay, what keeps you spiritually grounded now? What are the things that you do? And it's being part of the challenge. What is something that you do that keeps you spiritually grounded? So that you know that your roots go deep, that when adversity comes, you're not falling over and drying up. And where have you overextended yourself? Where are you outside of your margins? Your life is spilled over the pages, and you're trying to catch them. You've got so many balls up in the air, and you're just trying to see which one you're going to catch and which one is going to fall. And we can't do everything well if we've got too many things going. Something's going to fall, something is going to be neglected. And so how do we keep the priorities together? And that's by staying connected. That's the first thing, because that will help you, because then you'll know, okay, what am I holding on to that I need to let go of, that it was an assignment that somebody gave me and not what God gave me. And that's important that we recognize those two, that there are things that people give to us that put on your plate that you were never meant to carry. And so go back and look at my, series on boundaries, and protecting your peace. And what rhythms help me stay connected to God. So what are some things that you do that keep you connected to God? And then for our challenge, so it's like drum roll, our challenge. So create one intentional moment of rest or reflection every day this week. So whether it's you need to go to bed a little bit earlier, and you're staying up till like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then the next morning you're so exhausted you can't think straight, and you're keeping up this, you know, can you go to bed at a decent hour? My phone goes dark at 11. I have modes, and so I set my modes for 11 o'clock, and everything shuts down. Facebook, all the apps, except for my music app and the Bible app and YouTube. And so those are like the main three things that don't go dark and don't work. And I intentionally set it up that way. And so sometimes we may have to set those modes in place for ourselves. You know, for of us who have Androids, they have the modes, and you can set. You can even create custom ones. Like I have a custom one for me to prepare for the podcast. I have a custom one for church. And so there's sleep, there's exercise, there's different things that happen, and you can set these up on your phone to say, okay, my bedtime is this time. And everything goes dark. You shut everything down except the bare necessities, so that you can go to bed at a decent hour. And it automatically comes up 7 days a week. It just goes gray. If I'm on Facebook, Facebook closes. And sometimes that's what we need so that we can have that intentional time of resting and reflection, whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that you are doing what you need to do. And I do have an ebook that I wrote, Finding Me Time in My Busy Day, and it kind of gives you steps of things to do so that you can get yourself together, and so you can plan out your week. What it talks about helping you, like meal prepping, all the different things that you can do, how you can schedule in, your exercise time, how devotional time, all of those things, and give you some ideas of things that you can do to help you, take care of yourself, because there's only one you. And then, so we want to make sure that we take care of the you that you are, because only you can do your purpose. No one else can. You're the only one that was created to do that. And so you want to take care of yourself. And part of that is staying grounded as you're growing, as you're serving, as you're walking into your purpose. You want to make sure that your life is such that you can sustain the purpose of which you were called. Okay. So growth is healthiest when your roots are deep. So again, going back to that analogy of the tree, you want your roots to go deep. I think it's Psalms that said, "Blesses the man, you know, is planted by the water whose roots go deep until when sun comes out, when summer comes, he has no fear of the drought because his root has gone down into the water." That's what we want to be, make sure that we are rooted and grounded. So next week we wrap up our series, and we're talking about purpose in every season. There is a purpose for everything under the sun, that Solomon said. And so what is the purpose in the season that you're in right now? And how can you celebrate that season? And so when we talk about next week, how are we going to celebrate the season that we're in right now and not resent the season that we're in? So I want to thank you all again for joining me for another episode of Empowered to Live. Remember that God has given us everything we need to live this life and to live godly. See you all next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.